fantasy, madmen, fantasy, madmen, fantasy, madmen, fantasy football infotainment, fantasy, madmen, fantasy, madmen, fantasy, madmen, fantasy football infotainment. Fantasy football infotainment. Fantasy Madmen.
Hi, my name is Chris Hios.
I'm Magisha Feruzzi.
And we are the Fantasy Madmen. It's sad that the season's almost over, but it's time for the playoffs.
Playoffs.
Fantasy playoffs.
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 Playoffs. Whoa. I love this time of year. Hey, for those that made the playoffs, kudos, congratulations. For those that didn't, there's always next year.
In this edition of Fantasy Madmen, we're going to focus on making the right moves so you can take home your league's championship.
Now, are you going to be a fantasy champion or a fantasy chump?
Second place is the first loser.
Tell him again, Chris. Tell him again.
So we're going to start it off with the Fantasy Madmen rapid fire waiver wire pickups for the playoff stretch.
Rapid fire.
Well, I'm going to jump right in with Ladarius Green, tight end San Diego Chargers. I know he's a number 2, but he's putting up number 1 numbers. If you have Julius Thomas for Denver, who's hurt, he's a great pickup and play going forward. If you ain't got him, get him.
I'm going to go with Buffalo's defense. They have 14 sacks, 4 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries over the last 3 games, and they're playing teams like Tampa, Jacksonville, and Miami down the playoff stretch.
If you ain't got him, get him. I got him. You better get him. Well, I'm going to jump onto that defensive theme and go with Baltimore's defense. But because their offense is finally rounding into shape. So as a result of that, they have great matchups going forward. And they start the playoffs playing Minnesota. Matt Castle, he's good, but he's not that good. If you ain't got him, you better get him before someone else get him. Then I got him, and you lost him. Got it?
I'm going to go and jump off his point and go with Joe Flacco going against Minnesota in the first week. With Jacoby Jones back, he's poised to put up some solid numbers against some favorable matchups like Minnesota, Detroit, and New England.
Just so you know, this is my number 1 decision maker. You have something to say, baby?
If you ain't got him, get him.
And those are the Fantasy Madmen rapid fire waiver wire pickups for the playoff stretch. In this segment, we're going to talk about some big names
They turn out to be big lames.
in Week 14.
So bench him. Are you kidding me? Bench him.
I'm going to start off with Colin Kaepernick, quarterback for the 49ers going against Seattle. They shut down Drew Brees on Monday night.
True.
I see that happening again with Colin Kaepernick, even though he's got Crabtree back.
Bench him.
I'm going to go with Trent Richardson, running back, Indianapolis Colts. He's already been demoted. Donald Brown's the number 1. You were the problem in Cleveland. Bench him. Bench him.
I'm going to go with T.Y. Hilton, staying with the same game. Cincinnati's defense has been playing great, and with Reggie Wayne out, T.Y.'s stat line has been hurting. Bench him. Trust me.
I'm going to follow up with Darren Sproles, running back in New Orleans Saints versus Carolina Panthers. Panthers have one of the top 3 defenses in the league, and Sproles is a little bit banged up. So bench him. Bench him.
And those are the big names
That turned out to be big lames.
in Week 14. So bench him. Now these are the Fantasy Madmen
Sneaky.
starts for Week 14.
Sneaky.
I'm going to start off with Ryan Fitzpatrick going against the Denver Broncos. They will be playing from behind, and I'm predicting a lot of garbage time points for Fitzpatrick and the Tennessee Titans. Start them.
Well, I'm going to follow that up with Baltimore's defense versus Minnesota. Now, I know I've spoke about Minnesota and this matchup with Baltimore before, but it's because it's a great matchup. These guys are a great start if you need some help at defense.
Start them. I'm going to go with Joe Flacco going against the Minnesota Vikings. They're giving up the most points to fantasy quarterbacks, so it's a real solid start if you need a quarterback. Start them.
I'm going to go with Ben Tate versus Jacksonville. Now, Ben Tate had a great game, even in a loss to New England, and I expect the offense to kind of stick with the guns or the horses that are working right now.
Start him.
Those are the Fantasy Madmen
Sneaky.
starts for Week 14. Now, those are the sneaky starts. These are the Fantasy Madmen must starts for Week 14.
Must start.
I'm going to start off with Andre Brown, running back for the New York Giants. He's averaging over 20 carries, 4 targets, and 100 total yards since he's returned to the lineup. He's a must start.
Must start.
I'm going to go with Josh Gordon. the wide receiver from Cleveland, pride of Baylor. This guy has set NFL records, the only wide receiver ever with 200 receiving yards in back-to-back games. Going against a super soft Patriots secondary, he is a must-start.
He's a must-start. I'm going to go with Phillip Rivers, quarterback for the San Diego Chargers, going against the New York Giants. He's been money all year, and the Giants have been giving up a ton of points to the fantasy quarterback position.
Must-start. I'm going to stick to that same game, but flip it over this time with Shane Vereen, running back New England Patriots, with Stephen Ridley securely in Belichick's doghouse, and I do mean dog house.
Woof, woof.
Shane Vereen is a dual threat, catching and receiving going forward.
You better start him because he's a must-start. And those are the Fantasy Madmen must-starts
Must-starts.
for Week 14. In this segment, we're going to give you guys some fantasy playoff advice.
Playoffs, playoffs, playoffs. I love this time of year. So why don't you start it off, Chris?
Play the guys that got you there. That's all you can do.
Fair to say.
I usually like to drop any dead weight off my bench and pick up a couple extra defenses that have
Jackpot.
favorable matchups down the stretch. Even if you don't play them, you're keeping them away from the other remaining teams.
Yes. Now, I like to play matchups, matchups, matchups. It's just all about the matchups. At this time, look going forward, you're only loyal to winning. That's it. You're not loyal to any stats, anything else. It doesn't matter what the player's done before. It's all about who's the hot hand now. Alshon Jeffrey is hotter than Brandon Marshall. Nick Foles is hotter than Kaepernick. With that being said, you must ride the hot hand to the fantasy promised land. See you at the championship. I'll be there. Will you?
Good luck in the fantasy playoffs.
And may the fantasy force be with you.
Not you.
No, definitely not you.
Not you.
Because I'm going to see you after I run through this bum dude Brandon. Yo, Mr. Evans, doctor, you're going to need a doctor after I get through with you this week in fantasy. I'm in the playoffs in 3 leagues, and I'm in 3 leagues. Hello.
Me too. Three for 3. 2 buys, possibly another buy next week.
Jackpot. You have something to say, baby? No? Yep, there it is. That means bench him.
Playoffs? If you didn't make the playoffs, your team sucks.
Playoffs!
Hey, mama. I'm alright. How are you doing? Hey, like I'm just in the middle of recording a fantasy Madmen show right now. So let me just put you back.
Playoffs, playoffs, playoffs. Whoa. I love this time of year.